My name's MJ Valentine, and Sarah and I are going to be debating whether people should lie on their resumes if they believe that they are capable of doing the job that they've applied for. So the job market, as we know it, is very competitive, and employers are often seeking to check boxes and hire according to very narrow and limited criteria rather than according to an individual's merit or their transferable skills or their life experience. So I will be arguing in the affirmative that people should lie on their CVs if they genuinely feel as though they're capable of doing the job that they are applying for.
Yep, and I will be rebutting that, saying that you should never lie on your resume.
Okay, so from a utilitarian perspective first, considering that utilitarian ideals suggest that actions should always be judged by their outcomes. And as we know, that also leads to the belief that the morally correct action is the one that produces the greatest net happiness or the least net suffering. So they're lying on your CV isn't inherently wrong in itself. It's only wrong if it produces negative consequences, particularly for others. So, modern hiring practices will often exclude really talented people just because they don't meet what could be seen as superficial criteria rather than based on the actual merit of each individual. So, if lying allows one capable person to bypass what could be considered a broken system and make meaningful contributions to their work, then the minor deception of the lie on the CV would actually increase the overall happiness of that individual and reduce their suffering. But it could also increase the overall happiness of the team that they end up joining with the business, making that team more productive, therefore making that business more productive, more viable, making more money, increasing turnover, all of that kind of thing. So the total net happiness would be greater.
Yep. Okay.
Um,
Yep. So when you lie on your resume, you undermine something crucial, and that's trust. A resume is a reflection of a person's qualifications, skills, and experiences, and employers rely on it to make that critical decision about who's fit for that particular job. When the information is falsified, you're deceiving an employer. So even if you feel you can perform well on the job, you're starting the relationship with dishonesty and mistrust. From an ethical standpoint, the problem is even deeper because if you were lying to become the norm, it would create a workplace environment where no one can trust anyone's word. The integrity of the hiring process, as well as the people that are involved, kind of like gets eroded. So I recognize that the I can never get this word right, but utilitarianism argument might be one of the most persuasive for those who argue that lying is acceptable if the outcome is positive. But that idea focuses on the idea that the morally right action is the one that produces the greatest overall happiness. So if lying on a resume leads to someone securing a job they are capable of doing and that job results in good outcomes for everyone involved, it isn't necessarily justified because the line of thinking, it's not that simple. So utilitarianism is about looking at the broader consequences of an action, not just the immediate benefits. If lying becomes widespread, it would fundamentally change the hiring process. Employers would have to spend far more resources verifying qualifications, leading to the distrust and inefficiency in the environment. This reduces overall happiness because everyone's left wondering who's lying and who isn't. Furthermore, let's not forget about the long-term consequence of a lie. If a person who lied on their resume struggles to meet the expectations of that particular role, and if their coworker finds out they lied, the consequence of that lie could cause significant harm and mostly resentment, even the collapse of relationships in the workplace. And the risk of harm outweighs the short-term gain of securing the job, which is why I don't agree with that perspective.
so if we examine this issue through the deontological lens. So, deontological ethics considers both rules and exceptions. So, this would tell us that lying is inherently wrong, as you just said, Sarah, regardless of the consequences. But lying on your CV, while it might appear to be wrong, deontology gives us a more nuanced way to approach this issue. which would encompass both the doctrine of doing and allowing and the doctrine of the double effect. So they offer more flexibility in ethical approaches to various issues. So with doing and allowing, this would allow us to look at the difference between actively causing harm and passively allowing harm. So from this perspective, you could argue that by failing to lie on your CV and thereby decreasing your chance of getting a position that you know that you would be genuinely really good at, you might be allowing harm to occur because you could be passively allowing that job to go to somebody who is less capable than you are of doing that role. Also, with the doctrine of double effect, the actions can have both good and bad outcomes, but as long as the bad outcomes are not intended. So in that instance, if the primary intention is for an individual to perform well at work, if they have to lie on their CV in order to secure the role, then the lie is only really a means to an end. If they're coming from that place of being genuine and having a genuine desire to do good and to be a good asset to the company in that role. In other words, rule breaking is only a side effect. It's not the goal of the lie, it's not to break the rule. Also, if lying on your CV would help you to overcome systematic injustice, such as economic inequality, credentialism, or even racism, then the applicant is actually fulfilling a higher moral duty to justice, not violating it. And again, the lie then becomes the means to act justly in a system that may often fail to do that. Over to you, Sarah.
Yep. So deontology, which is inherently an ethical theory focused on rules and duties. So deontologists believe that lying is inherently wrong, like you just said. So regardless of the consequence, in this framework, honesty is the moral duty, not a convenience that can be bent on the situation. So it might be tempting to argue that lying on a resume isn't inherently bad, especially if the outcome is good, but deontology challenges that view. So according to deontologists, even a well-intended lie undermines the moral fabric of our society. So when we lie, we treat others as if they were if they were a mere means to an end, like you said, as opposed to treating them as ends themselves, worthy of respect. So in this case, a person reading the resume is being deceived into thinking someone is qualified for the role, which violates a basic ethical duty for respect for others. Deontology also emphasizes consistency in our moral actions. So if lying is justified once, then it becomes easier to justify it again. And then who can establish which lie is morally ethical and which lie isn't? So that single lie opens the door for more lies and more structures of what lying is deemed right or wrong to be blurred. And then we start to blur that trust that makes professional relationships possible. Therefore, even lying on a resume, even if it results in positive outcomes for that specific individual, it's still morally wrong from the deontological standpoint.
Thank you.
Over to you, Andrew.
So let's turn our attention now to virtue ethics, or character over conduct, which is an Aristotelian philosophy. And this obviously focuses on the development of a virtuous character and the need to fulfill one's function, not necessarily focusing on rules and outcomes, as in some of the other theories that we've discussed. So virtue ethics would say that the right action is the one that a virtuous person would choose, not the action dictated by the rules or judged by the consequences of those actions. So in this case, if a person's function or purpose is to create or to lead others or to solve complex issues, and they're prevented from doing that because of external or sometimes arbitrary constraints, then lying might be the only path open to them for self-actualization, so that they can prove that they're virtuous and worthy and capable of doing that role and contributing to society. The traits of a virtuous employee, it's worth considering, are things like courage and initiative and ambition, persistence, adaptability, competence, and things like that. All of those traits would be of a person who is willing to embellish their CV in order to get the right job that they believe will allow them to fulfill their goals or life purpose. Others who choose not to lie on their CV could be coming from a place of cowardice or of self-defeating humility, which you could argue are not particularly virtuous traits. So, if lying on a CV will allow a person to express their courage and take a chance and seize an opportunity to become the best version of who that they are, then it definitely should be considered as a virtuous act. And if we see morality as doing what the virtuous person would do, we need to ask if the lie is made from a place of selfishness or if it's made from a place of desire to contribute, as I said before, contribute to bettering the business or bettering society or the function of that organization within society.
Yep. Yep.
That's my take.
Yep. Yep. Okay, so virtue ethics, it kind of emphasizes character and the development of moral virtues, like you said, honesty, integrity, and courage. Virtue ethics would suggest that an action is morally right if it aligns with the virtues of a good person. Now, some might argue that lying on a resume could show ambition, courage, or initiatives, but virtues that are valued in the workplace, which are those things. However, if you dig deeper, virtue ethics doesn't simply ask whether a person is trying to accomplish something good. Virtue ethics, it does ask whether the action comes from a virtuous place. But does the act of lying on a resume reflect someone who was courageous, or does it reflect someone who was taking a shortcut because they're unwilling to face the challenges of the honesty of being in the job market? So a virtuous person is someone who builds trust and acts with integrity. Lying on a resume is not an expression of courage. It's an expression of fear, maybe fear of rejection, fear of failure. And while those are valid emotions, virtue ethics would suggest that true courage comes from facing those fears head on whilst remaining honest, even if the situation is deemed difficult. So ultimately, a virtuous person would not feel the need to deceive others because they would have the confidence in their own ability, their honest ability to succeed through hard work and perseverance, not through dishonesty. And also, virtuous ethics remind us that without integrity, there's no real success. It's kind of hollow.
Good points. And lastly, we were going to discuss intuitionism, which is the one that I tend to get wrong. So intuitionism suggests that everybody has a moral intuition about what is right and wrong. So a person might intuitively feel that a small lie on their CV is harmless, particularly if they have stronger feelings of confidence that they can perform the role well. So their moral intuition will tell them that there's little to no harm done, and the benefit of the lie is more significant and outweighs those other things more. If a system unfairly rewards privilege or nepotism or credentialism and things like that over the actual merit, then lying on your CV to challenge the system aligns more closely with this moral law than rigid honesty does, which keeps you very much within those black and white bounds. So if someone genuinely feels that their potential and talent matters more than a formal qualification, depending on the role, of course, then moral intuition might override those more technical black and white rules. One challenge of intuitionism would be conflicting intuitions. So a person might feel that it's wrong to lie on their CV, whereas others might feel that it's actually morally necessary, which would make it the correct choice. In cases where lying helps people overcome bias or poverty or other arbitrary barriers to employment, intuition often sides with the underdog.
Yeah, great points. So for intuitionism, that asserts that we have an inherent sense of what is right or wrong based on pretty much like our gut feeling. So if someone feels that lying on their resume is justified because they know they can do the job, their moral intuition might tell them that this is an acceptable action. However, the problem with intuitionism is that it's subjective. So one person might feel it's perfectly okay to lie if they know that they can perform well, while someone else might feel deeply like not comfortable, feeling that this isn't ethically right, and that the idea is surrounded by deception. So even if they could do the job well, they wouldn't choose to lie. So how do we resolve that moral disagreement? The ethical principle that guides intuitionism is often a personal feeling. It's not a mandatory feeling or like a universal law. That's why intuitionism often fails when it comes to complex ethical issues like lying on a resume in a workplace, in society, because what feels right to one person might feel wrong to another. When moral judgment is based solely on subjective feelings, then we run the risk, and that risk is justifying unethical behavior simply because something feels right in a situation as opposed to being right. So instead of relying on feelings, we should turn to ethical principles that provide a clear and consistent framework for making decisions. And in this case, principles like honesty and integrity and respect for others are far more reliable than someone's individual feeling. Over to
Well,
you.
this is a good place to summarize my
Yep.
arguments. Utilitarianism suggests that lying on your CV can increase happiness and justice. Deontology suggests that it's acceptable if your intent is genuine and respectful. Virtue ethics would show that lying on your CV is a bold act of self-actualization and personal growth, particularly if you're navigating arbitrary hiring rules or unjust systems. And intuitionism confirms that many lies feel morally permissible, particularly in the pursuit of fairness and equal opportunity. So, to summarize my initial opening remarks, I do feel that people should lie on their CVs if they genuinely believe they can do the job they're applying for and the lie doesn't directly harm others. And if the lie is going to open a door that leads to excellence and contributions and personal fulfillment, then it's not merely permissible, it is the right thing to do.
So my conclusion is, again, to reiterate the core of my argument, that lying on a resume is unethical, no matter of how capable you feel. From a deontological perspective, lying violates the duty to tell the truth and to treat others with respect. Regarding virtue ethics, it undermines the development of character and the true virtues, which are honesty and courage. From a utilitarian perspective, it creates a system of distrust that you don't know if that could harm everyone in the long run, given how complex workplace relationships are. And finally, intuitionism can't offer a solid foundation for ethical action because it relies on subjective feelings rather than universal moral principles. We live in a world that's full of challenges, and the job market is undoubtedly one of them. But lying on a resume only adds to a problem, and we shouldn't be looking for ways to cheat the system, but finding ways to improve that particular system if we feel it's flawed. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, MJ. Thanks. Okay, stop this recording. Stop.